One of the major things that makes it so hard for me to understand conservatives is their lack of curiosity. Imagine going through life and not having the slightest interest in people, cultures, or just stuff you don't know. Well, that's actually a misconception. Conservatives are often quite curious people. However, you have to understand their culture and how it limits and impedes curiosity and often turns it into something that is seen as a form of selfishness. I'm going to break it down in terms of class and religion. Regarding class, if you are an upper class, wealthy conservative, life is working out fairly well for you. Therefore, there's no need really to pursue new interests if what you're doing is making you happy and fulfilled. Happy and content people don't want to change things. But also, pursuing new interests might be considered a liability for a lot of different reasons. This can be done in a personal sense, like limiting what interests your child can pursue academically because some are just not lucrative enough or they're too risky. For instance, music as opposed to STEM fields. This can be on a more professional sense in that you don't want to open yourself up to liability or risk your social standing with your peers in a world where the wealthy often usually operate off of systems of trust. Because remember that wealthy people are vulnerable to exploitation if they place their trust in the wrong person. So they usually keep a low profile and they maintain strong friendships with mutual trust. However, if they start pursuing curiosity and new interest and associating with new people that are considered countercultural or outcasts, well, they risk losing that social standing, which is dangerous. If they lose that social standing, they could lose business, they could lose their wealth in the process. And so what you'll usually see is wealthy people not maintaining a sense of personal curiosity or waiting until a certain social concept becomes sanitized before they partake in it. For instance, rock music, hip hop music, or punk music and culture. It's also important to note that if a great deal of wealthy people knew how much their wealth was built off of the exploitation, neglect, the harm, and the death of people below them, well, that would probably be too much for them to bear. But at the same time, there's also a conflict of interest that prevents them from pursuing new interests. A big example of this is oil and gas. If you work for oil and gas, it limits your ability to see renewable forms of energy because that would impede upon the profits that built your wealth in the first place. So you have people who believe in renewable energy in a nominal sense, but because their paycheck relies upon oil and gas, well, they often ignore calls for energy reform. This conflict of interest can also apply to lower and working class conservatives as well, in that you can have conservatives who aren't making very much money, but they are working for specific fields that require them to ignore new information. Otherwise, they're out of a job. But the other thing to understand is that regarding the lower classes, in many ways, pursuing curiosity is a luxury that they don't have. A great deal of working class conservatives are just overworked, and in many ways, it's too much for them to learn about new concepts. So they often adhere to conservative ideology because it's rather simple, in that these people are bad, get rid of them, and everything will be fixed, which is a lot easier to understand than we live in a complex society where we must debate all these different ideas and understand what idea is the best for the most people to succeed. That takes a lot more time and effort, and not everybody has that. One of my favorite quotes is, "The greatest musician in America is working in a grocery store somewhere stocking shelves," which I firmly believe. I firmly believe that there's a great deal of lower and working class Americans who aren't able to maximize their potential because it's too much of a luxury to pursue their interests. In that, not even just music, and just going to college is too much for some people to do. This all ties into my next point regarding religion, because a great deal of conservatives in America happen to be evangelical Christians. And this could apply to any religion, but I'm specifically applying it to evangelical Christianity because it's the one that I'm the most familiar with. Now, the first thing to understand about religion is that all religions are a set of rules that a population follows in order to ensure their survival. And in general, what that means is that it is a system of control. A system of control that can be tightened or loosened at any given time. There's different examples of this throughout history. For instance, if you look at the temperance movement 100 years ago that was led by mostly Baptist Christians, it was a lot more critical of drinking alcohol, dancing, and certain other types of behavior that are considered more acceptable today. Today, I don't really see very many Christians critiquing each other for gambling. Gambling is considered socially acceptable. Drinking alcohol is largely considered socially acceptable, and swearing is a lot more socially acceptable than it was in the past. That is essentially by design. Christianity is designed to be loosely followed by a wide population and an empire to serve the interests of that same empire. That is the case when it came to the Roman Empire, with Theodosius making it the official Roman religion, and that is the case right now in the United States. Now remember that Christianity is designed with endless forgiveness. So Christianity in practice allows the wealthy and upper classes to do whatever they want, then claim repentance and receive forgiveness in the eyes of God, maintaining their social standing and also maintaining their power. However, the lower classes are encouraged to endure suffering and hardship so that they can receive favor from God and eventually receive a life in heaven. The exercise of this level of control on a population results in several different mental developments, which I find incredibly fascinating. Here's three that I want to emphasize. The first one being that often evangelical Christians teach their congregations that they should do everything for God. Everything that you do, think, or say must be related to God somehow. And so you create this mental leash where everything must go back to the same concept. In that, why concern yourself with questions if you have the only answer that you need? So it turns being curious into an act of selfishness, where you being interested in a new concept that is not related to God means that you are straying away from Him. This makes it incredibly difficult for a Christian to dive into the deepest depths of a subject, because the deeper they learn about something, the more they risk potentially straying away from God. And you can see this in Christian music, for instance, because Christian music almost always has to tie back to salvation somehow, when in reality, you can just make music because it's what you want to do. There are multiple times when I've had people tell me that they want to be a filmmaker, but they don't want to make films that aren't about God because they feel like it's an act of selfishness. Even when debating something like abortion, for instance, most Christians do not want to consider alternate viewpoints of abortion because they fear that it's heresy for them to even think of a viewpoint that is contrary to pro-life beliefs. The second interesting development is when control is placed upon Christians, that usually results in resentment. Resentment because they're being kept from doing things that they naturally want to do. Things as simple as dating someone that they're interested in, or singing, dancing, being affectionate towards other people, or something as inane as reading a book like Harry Potter. That actually happened to me as a child. But what happens is when these people feel this sense of resentment, they don't know what to do with it, so they usually direct it outwards towards non-believers. It becomes a coping mechanism for Christians to start rationalizing that non-believers aren't truly happy. They become resentful that their own religion limits their ability to live their full lives. However, someone who is not a Christian living a full happy life is only happy because they're 1, naive or delusional, maybe it's 2, because they didn't earn what they achieved, or 3, that they got it through illicit means, sometimes something as grand as a blood sacrifice, for instance. So you'll see this derisive attitude from a lot of Christians when it comes to cultures that they don't understand, where they either laugh, mock, or disparage things as being ungodly, acting like people don't know any better and that they know the truth, they know the real answers, when in reality, it's their way of coping with the fact that they might not actually be living the fullest life, which leads to the third and the biggest, most important mental development of this control being exercised, is that for some people, if they learn that their life was for nothing, or that the things that they sacrificed or the effort that they put into a religion was only to serve the interests of the wealthy as opposed to actually achieving a moral good, well, that can be also too much for them to bear. There are some people who don't want to know that the world could be better because it would undermine the pain and hardship that they've lived through. It would mean that they've wasted their time, or that they have been tricked by people they placed their trust in. It could mean that they are potentially complicit in the suffering of other people, and that can be mentally devastating. Curiosity and conscientiousness is like having a kitchen and turning the lights on. You are more aware of how dirty your kitchen is if you turn the lights on and you can see all the roaches scattering on the floor. However, if you keep the lights off, things look better, and some people just want to keep the lights off because it's easier on their mind.